But is West crazy? That was not our conclusion. In fact, we've rarely heard a man speak so honestly and so movingly about what he believes.
I got a lot of respect for Kanye. I really do. He's a smart guy. He deserves to be criticized the same as everybody else deserves to be criticized. But call him a billionaire. Call him a genius entrepreneur. Call him eccentric. Call him whatever you want, but give him credit where credit is due.
Frankly, Kanye sounds much more sane than virtually everybody else in public life. And again, we are a society that rewards people for twerking in thongs while being 150 pounds overweight. But if you have an artist who creates art in which people sing about God, that's the real crazy, according to the left.
But he's not wrong about everything. Look, is there a conversation to be had about secular humanists with Jewish last names in Hollywood exploiting people in positions of, the performance arts talent? Yeah.
It's an amazing thing. Right, the media definition of insanity is not actual mental illness. That's not mental illness. Mental illness is when you're right wing. Mental illness is when you put on a MAGA cap. Mental illness is when you say that you don't want to kill babies. That's the true mental illness.
Is there a disproportionate number of people with Jewish last names in higher banking? That's an argument that can be made.
Pathologizing of right-wing viewpoints goes back a long way. It goes actually back to a book by Theodore Adorno called The Authoritarian Mind. The suggestion was that there was a pathological divide in capitalist societies. And so the idea was that if you were right-wing, you were going to become a fascist. And that was because you were pathologically ingrained. There was something wrong.
We are going to finish watching that in a minute, but I want to introduce everybody. I am Ben Burgess. This is Give Them an Argument. I am joined, as always, by our super producer, Jake Appett, union organizer and MFA student, and most importantly, podcast producer, and our very talented graphic designer, J. Andrew World. But right now we are also joined by the gentleman who made that video that we just watched the first part of, and has made many other videos that we have enjoyed here on the show. Aamon Hawk, how are you doing?
Good. Hello, everybody.
This is I love, by the way, I was just thinking about as we were watching the first part of that video. There's a time many years ago when I was a grad student, and my friend Robin and I were both like covering something in our classes. We both sat in each other's classes to kind of see how the discussion went. And I remember I was sitting in on Robin's, and I wish I remember what it was, but I remember like a student in the class said just the most amazing series of like crazy stoner things I've ever heard anybody say in class. And Robin's response was, well, that's something you could say. Because she was just like she just didn't know what to say in the moment. She was just, that's something you could say, right? That's a combination of noises you can make, right? Like, and watching, it's like, well, that's an argument you could make, right? I mean, it's like, look, I'm not saying that like 5 Jewish bankers control the world and drink everybody's.
Oh, right.
It's an argument you could make.
Yeah, I mean, usually the most common response I get to my videos is that people want to get high before they watch them, or they do not want to get high before they watch them. So
I can understand both of those, especially the second one.
So one of the things I was going to say about this video is that that intro, I'm glad it worked. I really like how that intro turned out, but I rendered this one out in 4K, so sometimes those pixels get really pixelated, and that really bothers me just from the zoom out from Tucker Carlson. But I really like that shot though.
Yeah, I think so, and I think it all kind of works too for the atmosphere. That like a little pixelated is not necessarily the worst thing for that.
That's true.
So okay, I don't want to say too much more about this till we watch part 2 of the video, but wanted to introduce everybody. And we've just heard friends of show, Tucker Carlson, Tim Pool, and Steven Crowder say that actually, Kanye sounds like the sanest person they've ever spoken to.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? Crazy? There's nothing crazy here. So let's continue.
Everybody we have on is fighting with everything they've got. There's This is a war against you and your family of inflation and collapse. So when you keep us in the fight, you keep yourself in the fight. And this is life and death. So go to InfoWarsStore.com and get amazing products and sign up for auto ship and continue support. Make a donation at the top because he's a gladiator and a champion in the fight. And if you don't support us, you're helping the enemy. And I'm not bitching at listeners. I'm telling you, this is all-out war. Yay, thank you so much for coming to Austin.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And let's just get it all going now, because I want to get into everything about your plans to try to bring jobs to America, unifying people, running for president, all those other issues. We want to hear from Ye. Go ahead.
There's Jewish people that are basically hiding me under their floorboards right now, under their wooden floors. It's like a reverse version of the Holocaust. I thought...
That's right. You're not Hitler. You're not a Nazi. You don't deserve to be called that and demonized.
Well, I see good things about Hitler also. Every human being has something of value that they brought to the table, especially Hitler.
Let me just get this out front. I believe in free speech, and that's why I want you to be here and be able to say whatever you want. I'm quite the historian from a lot of multifaceted views.
Alex.
Yes, sir.
I've got the perfect answer for the ADL. Netanyahu. What do you have to say to Alex Jones right now, Nick Fuentes and Ye? It was bad. It was bad for Trump to meet with Nick and Ye. Okay.
Well, look. I'm glad you guys are here, and we can sit here and upset. All I'm telling you is, do you guys realize that the British government created Hitler? And the Nazis, in my view, were thugs that shook people down, did a lot of really bad things.
Well, they did good things too. We're going to stop dissing the Nazis all the time.
Okay, we're going to get to that. I don't want to get digressed into this, but remember I told you a story about my grandfather.
Hey, I'm the head of the Mossad. I'm going to kill you and take your children away from you.
Thanks a lot, Netan. Back to you, Alex.
Man, I'm definitely overwhelmed here right now. Listen, all I'm trying to get through here is, I believe every group should be able to be
critical. His name to Netan. What you want, Netan?
Hey, right after this, I'm going to say you're crazy. I'm going to take your family away from you. We're not done with you yet. You cannot cause free thought. We have to control the history books. We have to control the banks. And we have to go and kill people. Also, we're in the
So, and in a little while, hopefully you're going to take the mask off, because is this actually Ye here? This is crazy. Listen, all I'm trying to say is,
Milo's Jewish.
And you've got a little bit of the Hitler fetish going on.
It's not a fetish. I just love information.
I'm not on the whole Jew thing. It's what I'm saying. I don't care if people talk about it. I believe in free speech. I'm just really worried about the forced injections, world government, 5G, the open borders, the collapsing currencies, war with Russia. What do you think?
Nick?
Let Ye speak. Let the man speak. You may not agree with what he has to say, but why don't you want him to speak? I don't get it.
I do love Hitler. We love everyone.
You're just saying love humanity and stop getting past the labels. It's
love is the key. Everyone's promoting this loathing, and it's time to promote love.
I mean, just because you're in love with the design, you're a designer. Can we just kind of say, like, you like the uniforms, but that's about it?
There's a lot of things that I love about Hitler. A lot of things.
Oh my God! Look.
And he didn't kill 6 million Jews. That's just like factually incorrect.
You are something else. Look, you look really friendly and nice, but with that mask, you look evil as hell.
To Jamie Dimon, to the people who... What's that?
Got an Amber Alert. Here's what I'm saying.
Wow.
My grandfather would never tell World War II stories. And after he died, we read over his stuff, and he never even told my dad all the stuff he did and everything. It was all in their letters and commendations. And he told me, he said, kid, I was like 8 years old.
I thought Amber Alerts is when my ex-girlfriend Amber was doing something in the streets. I got to...
Before he died, I was like 5 years old. The point was, and I was like, tell me a World War II story. Tell me a World War II story. And he said, okay, well, we came in out of Africa. We came into Italy. He was there 3 years. He said by the time they got to Germany, they went into this death camp, and there were piles of dead bodies 100 feet tall with blackbirds eating people's eyeballs out. All I'm telling you is that just because you hate the globalists and what they're doing, and I get it. Klaus Schwab's grandfather was a Nazi. Okay, there's Nazis above the ADL.
Yeah, but Nazis are like kind of cool.
Hello there. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you're interested in knowing more about how I make these, supporting me on Patreon, even for just $1, will grant you access to various behind-the-scenes videos and tutorials. As you can see, I've rekindled my relationship with the hamsters and we are working together once again. Despite our differences, we are aligned by our dark and sinister ambition. Be sure to follow me on Twitch. I have a lot of plans on there that are coming to fruition. On both my channel and Amy Lark's, you can interact with and customize our models in various fun ways.
Man, so glad the drugs kicked in.
This would be, yeah, like right in the middle of that. I think would be every time. So I've seen this video a couple times, and I've seen the original footage of Kanye and Alex Jones a couple times, and every time I watch it, like none of that dialogue ever gets any less amazing. It's like, I love everybody. There's good things about everybody, especially Hitler.
Right. At one point, Alex Jones tried to reel him back and be like, it's about love in general, right? Just loving everybody. He's like, no, I really love Hitler.
Hitler specific.
Like,
yeah.
It's about design, Design is what you're into, right?
He's like, no, I love everything about the Nazis.
That's actually more of that original interview than I've ever watched. I actually found that more palatable than watching the original, which maybe is part of your intention in a weird way, and that the sinisterness is brought to the front. But yeah, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say that the interview is like 3 hours long. I had edited down as much as possible. There's a whole bunch of parts that I considered funny, but I still ended up cutting it because it disrupted the flow too much. I wanted to be as compact as I could, make a 3-hour interview.
You unearthed a few lines that I actually didn't see making the rounds, on Twitter, for example, him literally saying Hitler did not kill 6 million Jews, like that kind of like flagrant Holocaust denialism. I didn't see that actually. You had to dig that up, I guess.
Yeah, there's 2 points in the interview in which he that was the most blatant time. But the other time, before that, he said, and the Holocaust isn't what everyone says it was. That's what he says first. And then about 20 minutes later or whatever, he says the full-on outright denial. So I had to include that to show that that's like the full level of depravity.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. Like, in a way, it's like the way that, thinking back to like 2016, the way that Donald Trump would say things like once every day and a half that in any normal election year would have just like ended the campaign. Like that would have been would have been at the very least all anybody talked about for months. But they would just kind of, a lot of these things would just kind of get lost in the noise. People would forget that he'd said them because there's something else, a day and a half later. And like sometimes you'd remind people, I was like, oh, remember when Donald Trump picked like a 4-day long Twitter fight with like some Gold Star parents because like he said their dead son sucked or whatever. It's like, yeah, I kind of forgot about that. And it's like sort of the same thing. That's like, that really says something about if you have an interview where one of the things you say is, well, it wasn't 6 million. And that's not even the part that makes the rounds because like there's so much other stuff that's so much more attention grabbing. Like that's an interview for the ages.
Yeah, I mean, he said a bunch of stuff and he repeated himself a lot too. That's the thing. In the interview, he professes his love for Nazis more times than I put in the video. Like I actually cut out a bunch because it got redundant. So yeah, there was a lot in that interview.
So do you do drugs when you watch these interviews? Because
no, I don't do any drugs whatsoever. And when I watch these, I'm just conveying sort of the cosmic horror that I feel when I'm watching it. That's what I always say. Like I get this, but it's a comical cosmic horror. Like I'm watching it, it's disturbing, but it's also definitely funny.
It's like a funny Lovecraft.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm curious, and I might just be ignorant of the artistic progression here, but like when you made that connection of like, not only is there this darkness in a lot of these right-wing pundits, right, but like that you want to bring it to the forefront, like with animation specifically, like how you made that connection, because it's a really good one. But there must have been some moment where you're like, I really have something here.
Well, I mean, I started making animations to like it initially started off as just a way to learn animation. Like I read the news all day long, I watch the news all day long. I'm going to start animating for the news so I can be productive, kind of. So I can get the news and the animation done at once. And then slowly but surely, I realized it was a perfect method of conveying how I feel when I consume this information, and also apply all of the knowledge I have about filmmaking and animation and all that stuff. So essentially, I think that all culminated to me making these.
Yeah.
I didn't start off with horror videos. I started off with like really dumb videos.
Yeah, but there is something about the way, I don't know, like something about the apocalyptic way that these guys see the world. The just the layers of absurdity here. That I mean, it really does capture. But before we get too far from the subject of Hitler, I was watched, A+ sentence opening. I don't know.
That was one of your better transitions. Unironically, yeah.
Oh, we're talking about Hitler, right?
Waiting for that to get animated.
I was watching some Tim Pool, as you do, and saw this interesting speculation about the history of World War II.
The useful idiot speculation, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Noel Coward, the author, you probably heard of him, and Ian Fleming were able to convince the U.S. to set up its secret security establishment in 1942, and they put Bill Donovan as head of that. That becomes eventually the CIA, right? So that's that secret establishment. It's really just a private army of the Rockefellers is what it amounts to.
Do you think, this is a bit more anecdotal, but do you think that there were like greater global powers that pushed Germany into World War II, and Hitler was kind of like a useful idiot?
Just asking questions.
Who is that nerd guy with the long hair? I always forget his name, but he always says the stuff. Oh,
yeah, I think this is the guy. I don't know his proper name. I believe this is the guy people refer to sometimes as Moon Lord. I actually had a conversation with him once because I was at last summer. I was at I did a debate, where one of the people I was debating was Tim Pool, and so I ran. There's a point where I was leaving the hotel lobby, and Tim and what could only be described as his entourage are sitting around the couches in the hotel lobby. And I guess Tim recognizes me. It's like, hey, man, whatever. And I had actually met him in the flesh before, so I meet him and everybody. That guy with the glasses, I swear to God, like the most asinine political conversation I've ever had in my life was the one that I had with him when I sat down and said hi to those guys. Like, I am counting like a few weeks ago when I did that thing in Connecticut. I went out with my friend who taught there, to get a drink at like the towny bar, and we ended up having this long conversation with this guy who was sitting at the bar who was really into survivalism and was asking questions about UFOs and ghosts and stuff. It's like that guy 100 out of 100 times, like way better conversation than with Moon Lord. Moon Lord was like expressed, I'm just gonna keep calling him that, was expressed that he was like really upset about inflation. And I was like, yeah, okay. But like, he was like I'm really angry about this. This is really not okay. I was like, okay, but like, what do you want to do? He was like, yeah, that's what people are saying, man. What are you going to do? What's the plan? It's like, no, seriously, but like just saying inflation is bad isn't that controversial. Like, what do you actually want to do? And he's just like, oh, like I like really deflated him for a second. He was like, I don't know, maybe it's something with crypto. Like that's that dude. But yeah, I absolutely loved that. I should say, to be fair, right after where we cut off, the guest explains that the British globalist Fabians were actually funding Hitler. So he wasn't a useful idiot. He was part of their master plan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he's that guy, the Moon Lord guy. He's always the one who takes it to a very anti-Semitic direction. He gets very angry, and then the other people kind of like reel him back a little bit. It seems that's everything I've seen of him so far.
It seems like every conservative show needs like someone to reel back the anti-Semitism, right? It's just kind of it's like they could just have a full-time person that's like, we got a little too far. Yeah, it's getting a little, because like they walk the line. Like I guess in the first video, Alex Jones shows like how far up he gets to the line before saying no, we're not going to say that. Like, hey, I hate the globalists. I hate. He lists like 5 or 6 things that are all dog.
We gotta call them globalists. That's basically, he was just telling him we gotta call them globalists. Basically,
you can't just say Jews. No, what they need is like it's like the way that like movie studios for like sex scenes, they'll have the intimacy coordinator. Like you should have the anti-Semitism coordinator. You have to, if you're gonna do an anti-Semitism scene, you're gonna have to like talk to them and make sure you're clear. You got to say globalist.
Those coordinators are they're out of work recently because they're just coming out with it, like on like the Steven Crowder stuff we watched. They're just saying the word Jew. Now he's trying Jewish last names, but
they're unveiling now.
Yeah.
Well, that was an interesting transitional thing, right? That Crowder thing at the beginning of the video, because it's because he's Crowder isn't quite saying Jew, but he's not saying globalist either. He's saying like there's this like the thinnest possible veneer of like I'm not quite going to go for it. He's like, well, people with Jewish last names.
Yeah, I mean that was a crazy clip. I had to include it because I mean it was basically unveiled as well, and it was very unhinged stuff. There were a few more clips that I was going to include in that spot, but I had to, because there was the build up obviously to the Ye interview was very large, and I just tried to condense it as much as I could, because there was so much that happened during that previous to the interview.
Well, one of the things I like so much about your video is that it just the way that it perfectly captures what makes that interaction so fascinating, which is that this is Alex Jones. Like he's I mean, he's like the, I don't know, Lord Mayor of Crazy Town. I mean, like this is the guy, who's like ripping off his shirt and talking about demons and how they're trying to turn the frogs gay and all that stuff. And, so you see the first Alex Jones you see in your video, he's doing his thing, right? He's on full Alex Jones. And, I loved that the selling the supplements, like that got worked in. But then it's like, oh, okay, well, it's Kanye West, right? We're gonna get some clicks, we're gonna get some listens, have Kanye West on. And he just wants him to tone it down a little bit and just the feeling that you get that like this guy is officially much too crazy for Alex Jones.
Yeah, I mean, I used his frog form to sort of convey like the levels of what Alex Jones is feeling throughout the interview. And by the end of it, it's sort of like almost like the frog was a character that he used to entertain and pull in those audiences. And then by the end, he's sort of just like, all right, could you please just say globalist?
To your point about that media tour, it was interesting thinking back to it because basically it rides the wave perfectly of like some of a manic episode, or so it seems. I don't want to diagnose for sure, but he's says he's bipolar and he seems like he's basically just manic. I don't know that for sure, but it's basically following that logic, right? Where he's like increasingly manic interviews, at least we can say. But what's funny is that there's literally no limit in the right-wing media sphere for putting any kind of damper on it, where it's just like the any amount he wants, unless maybe he hit it, but it seems like any amount he wants to be on television. Yeah.
Finally did hit it because
like finally hit it. Yeah.
Yeah. Those early clips where Tucker and, everybody being like, oh, this guy seems totally fine. What are you talking about? Right. Like at that while he was at like 8.5. And then like Alex Jones, I think, is where you finally see him hitting 10.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I wanted to include originally his interview pieces, because they were saying that he's actually reasonable after he's already said a bunch of anti-Semitic stuff. So it's not like it was like a gotcha. Oh, now he's anti-Semitic. It's like, no, he already said that stuff. But he did go to 10, as you say.
And Tucker did actually trim down some of the some of the anti-Semitic stuff too.
100%, yeah.
And those got released, by the way. So if anybody's curious, you can actually go and find them.
Yeah. I don't think I've seen all of it. I just saw the editing points, and I heard people talk about it. I haven't seen the footage yet. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah, it's been a while since I've saw it, but unfortunately, I ingest a lot of crap.
Well,
I do too.
Speaking of ingested things, you also made a much shorter video of just Tim Pool. Jake, do we have this?
I can't possibly have babies because of climate change.
This is right, which is nonsense.
No.
But I do think it's crazy that I'm about to be 34 and I have no family. Because my dad had 2 kids by the time he was 27.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man. You know what the problem is, though? It's definitely not me. I think it's everybody else.
That was a fun one to animate.
I can imagine. God,
I got the chance to kind of remake that in this video with him eating another hot dog through the brain.
Yeah. At the beginning, that was just absolutely
just a little bit there.
What I love so much about that one we just watched is that it captures something. Like when I was getting ready for that debate, I watched more Tim Pool stuff than I ever had before because I don't hate myself quite enough to just watch it all the time. And like I think it captured like the specific thing that's like sort of unsettling to me about watching him, which is that he still insists like the one thing that definitely hasn't changed about Tim Pool, Occupy Wall Street to present, is how he dresses and kind of like physically presents himself, and that's like and that seems in some weird way to be part of the package or part of the appeal, right? It's like he just to sort of come like sort of again look like he's this he's this skater punk kid who just came in or whatever, and at the same time that he's saying all this insane shit. But it's not just that he's saying insane shit, it's that he's saying it in just in the weirdest sort of deadpan. It's almost like he's trying to, sometimes you get the sense that he's like trying to imitate the cadences of like what he thinks a very serious person is supposed to sound like, like old-timey newscaster or something. I don't know what it is, but there's something really, really jarring about the combination of all these things.
Oh yeah, I can see that. But he is also he says a lot of I have a lot of lines of him. The reason I like to include in my videos because he says a lot of stuff that's always comically wrong. So, he'll say something with so much confidence, like the Trump is going to win by a 50-state landslide.
Yes,
that sort of thing. It makes him perfect for my videos. It's like I love anybody who says stuff with immense confidence. It lends itself to animation.
Imagine how anybody could disagree with this.
I'm curious. Yeah. Do you watching him get a sense of what his appeal is to his millions of fans?
Some of the people I cover are very difficult to understand why people like him. I do kind of understand why people like him, especially if they're not the people that are like normal or that are common and don't really they want to identify as a centrist even though they have right-wing beliefs. And I think there's a large amount of people in this country that are like that, and I think that's the appeal, but it still is very strange to me.
Yeah, no, exactly. While I've still got you, I did want to spread the pain around here and share one more clip from that show that I was watching earlier. So Jake, this is the one that's labeled Libertarian Secret Society.
Because I just had a thought that I just
so the Fabians are really just the ideologues who took Marxism and wanted to reform it, and their ideology was better, it was more successful, more useful than classical Marxism, because they were like, oh, the proletariat will rise up, and then proletariat just cares about going to lunch and eating their lunch pail, right? They're not interested in Marxist theory, right? So what the Fabians realized was that if we combine the Marxist revolution with big money, we could have a lot more effect. And that's precisely what they did. And so Beatrice Sidney Webb, George Bernard Shaw, they actually got to be really good buddies with a lot of the American industrialists and elites, and they influenced them, including Henry Ford, to be into forms of socialism. And so that's why the whole push for the last century is this sort of technocratic socialist model.
So can we just do the same thing, but like in the other way? Can we like get some prominent libertarian-minded individuals to come together to form a secret society that bestows liberty and shatters the shackles, and you know what I mean?
Can you imagine some shadowy group of big money pushing libertarian policies? It's challenging to
that would be
to conceive of.
It's just too alien.
That's crazy.
It never happened for me to even be able to conceive of it. like is he just like Tim, just in this weirdly innocent way, he was like, hey, could we maybe, and then it's like he's just coming up with like, all of the shit that like the Koch brothers like actually spent decades doing.
Yeah, I guess he's just pretending they don't exist.
Who are going to donate a bunch of money to us so we can like spread around libertarian ideas. I mean, why has nobody ever thought of doing that before?
Yeah. Yeah, that's strange.
I do want to say, so as I was, we've been doing, as we've had you here, and this has been awesome. Really hope this has come back. But as I was like going through and looking at some of your other videos to talk about after Yedolf, I noticed, so like, okay, so usually the ones that we'll watch on here are sort of right-wing pundits or politicians saying things that sort of lend themselves to Lovecraftian cosmic horror imagery, but I also did see this one of somebody in a slightly different category, which I was really reminded of because I've been going through that Tim Pool video, and I was thinking about the how in his view of the world, like the rich, globalists, elitists have been pushing what did he say, techno socialism, and I was thinking about that, and it's like, okay, well, look, that's a really weird thing to believe, right? This is because I would think, I don't know, I'm a simple man. I tend to think that like rich people like having money and want to have more of it rather than less, and don't be redistributed away. So what would be a scenario where some of the richest people, or at least one of the richest people in the world, actually might end up pushing something like that? And I saw you have a video for this.
All right, welcome to the Neuralink product demo. I'm really excited to show you what we've got. I think it's gonna blow your mind. So I want to emphasize the purpose of Neuralink. Like, what's our goal? Our goal is to solve important spine and brain problems with a seamlessly implanted device. And this is sort of what it looks like. This is our little device. I mean, frankly, to sort of simplify this, it's more complicated than this, but in a lot of ways, it's kind of like a Fitbit in your skull with tiny wires. So does it actually work? And what I'm excited to show you, I call it like the little pigs demo. Yeah. All right, cool. So you want the surgery to be as automated and as possible, and the installation of a link done in under an hour. So you can basically go in the morning and leave the hospital in the afternoon, and it can be done without general anesthesia.
imagine for a few moments what our life would be like if we could access, let's say, 20% of our brain's capacity.
유론 모시고になりました。プレゼンテーションにご参加いただきありがとうございます。
Oh man, look at those graphics. That's one of my older ones.
It was so amazing, though. Just the like. I mean, is that? I mean, I know you just said it was one of the older ones, but I mean, do you remember? Is that a largely unedited stretch of Musk audio?
Oh yeah. I got it from his demo where he showed pigs that allegedly had the implants in their brains, and the only thing is I didn't want the video to be super long, so I only edited out about like 100 of his like he is not a very good public speaker, which I can't really fault him for, but I did have to edit out a lot of that in order to get him to be within a 3-minute video.
Fair enough.
I like that one though. It's a fun one.
Yeah, I mean, because just the combination, like, it's so, just the actual Musk audio track. I mean, the fit between that and what he's doing in the video.
What does he call him? Like a little, like he's actually talking about a real pig, but he says like, "Come here, little piggy, little pig."
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really creepy. And I also enjoyed the what is it? The Limitless reference. Is that where the Morgan Freeman audio is from? Yeah. Yeah.
somehow higher he's able to create a new contraption around his brain just because he's smart now. But I also there was what was I gonna say? The that stretch of animation where it zooms through, I remember being concerned about that causing epilepsy or anything, but it's one of my favorite scenes that I've done just because I really like the visual. In general, I like the this is similar to what I always say about my animations, which is that I don't really change it from the audio of what they say that much, because I don't think parody, like you can't really parody from what they say, so you have to build around it instead visually, and I think that's more effective. What I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense to me. That like just try to come up with a more extreme, like in some of these cases too. Like we're not going to play it right now, but we played before in the show, like the one. Well, actually, two of my favorite examples of this that you did were one, the Swanson one, that's like the couple sitting on the couch watching Tucker Carlson on TV as he like works himself into like a fit of like of like anger about immigrants and homeless people and all this stuff.
Yeah.
Or there's like a somewhat similar one. There's like I think it might just be called Charlie Kirk Descends into Madness, and it's like in both cases, it's like trying to come up with a more extreme version of the actual words that are coming out of their mouths would be pointless, right? I mean,
Exactly. That's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah, so I mean, it makes perfect sense to me that, as you say, just don't try to add to it. Just build around the.
There's like the olden days. They used to, like, when you do a political cartoon, you write a giant speech bubble of what they're saying, and it's just a little bit more crazy than what they say in real life. Like that's not needed at all anymore.
But really, I also want to like thank you, because I try to avoid a lot of what these people do and what these people say, and a lot of it is because I'm feeling the dread that you express. So I think seeing that actually visually, it's horrific, but in a way, it's almost soothing. Like compared, like, because it's cathartic. Yes, because that's what I don't realize it, but that's what I feel inside. Because like some of this stuff just feels civilization ending in a really weird way. So also thank you for watching so much of it. I hope that doesn't affect you negatively.
Yeah, I mean, it's a sublimation process. I consume the garbage that they produce, and then I turn it into something that I consider fun. So I think that viewers appreciate that as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you for your service. I do. So before we let you go, can you tell people where they can find all of this and how they can support you?
Sure. I mean, I've got a Patreon, Aamon Hawk or Aamon Animations on Patreon, and my YouTube is Aamon Animations, and everywhere else on all the other social medias, I'm Aamon Hawk. I'm going to be doing some Twitch streams probably by the end of this month, I believe. There should be a whole crazy event because I have a whole bunch of features, like I can turn into Donald Trump and Alex Jones and all of that, so it'll be a whole lot of fun. And yeah, those are basically all the projects I'm working on currently.
Very nice. All right. Thank you so much, Aamon.
Thank you very much.
All right. That was Aamon Hawk, the creator of many videos that we've enjoyed watching on this show in the past. Going back to, I think the first one we did was our Jordan Peterson is Jordan Peterson wants you to clean 12 more rooms episode of like 2021. We showed the 12 more rules video, which still might be my favorite of these, although honestly it's hard to pick. So in a few minutes we're going to be joined by Jacobin assistant editor Nick French to talk about his article that he wrote a little while back that I was really interested in, which is called How Analytic Philosophers Have Made Sense of Capitalism. And this was actually the part of what I was writing about on my last Substack article that I did on Sunday. So people who aren't familiar, I started doing this on Sunday, January 1st, right at the beginning of the year. Every Sunday, I've been posting an essay about philosophy on benburgess.substack.com. Been calling that philosophy for the people because the double meaning that it's both the parts about political philosophy are bound up with the left political program. It's for the people in that sense, but it's also for the people in the sense of not just for a few academics, but for anybody who's interested. And the one that went up yesterday is called Is Analytic Philosophy Counter-Revolutionary, which is obviously a playful way of putting it, but the deck there is a pair of Battle of Jacobin articles. Christoph Schringa argues the analytic philosophy is intellectually narrow and deeply tied to anti-communist liberalism, and Nick French rightly pushes back. So you can read that again, benburgess.substack.com, and see kind of some of what I think about this. But I'm really excited to hear from Nick in just a few minutes. But meanwhile, I did want to mention just a couple of other things that I have written since the last episode, because we didn't have a regular episode last week. So for the Daily Beast, I wrote a article. Well, it's a very Daily Beast-ish title. They changed it to. It's now called Democratic Socialism Isn't Soviet Communism, you idiots. I think it was originally like Congress votes to condemn socialism, having no idea what that is, which is slightly more my title. But at any rate, it's about Congress voting to condemn the horrors of socialism. And it's making a lot of the same points I made in my discussion on air on this show with Rob Larson that we put out as a clip debunking the idiotic congressional resolution to condemn the horrors of socialism. And also more recently, one called Roger Waters is not helping bring peace to Ukraine, where I'm kind of trying to thread a needle between doing two things at once with regard to the speech that former Pink Floyd frontman Roger Waters just gave at the UN, actually at the invitation of the Russian delegation, which artists say that, like the sort of central thing he was saying, right, that we need to negotiate ceasefire in Ukraine, I completely agree with. But I also think he's being massively unhelpful in his way of his way of advocating that, like, for example, speaking at the UN under the invitation of the Russian delegation, it's not very anti-war to actually speak at the invitation of the country that started the war and is continuing it. And there's stuff in the speech where he says, like, he calls the Russia, he just says the Russian Federation, and Ukraine, he says the Kiev regime, and it's like, oh man, you are not helping right now. And I think that I guess a very pithy summary of the article would be, as advocates for a ceasefire in the Ukraine go, Noam Chomsky, greater than symbol, Roger Waters. But I will admit, though, something very, very cheesy, just, between me and you guys and anybody who ever watches this on YouTube, which is that as I was leaving the Panera, where I was camped out working on this article, I was in the car and another brick in the wall came out of the car, and I had this moment of like the stab of guilt about criticizing Roger Waters. Yeah.
Yeah, you can separate the art from the artist, right?
I hope so, man. There's so many of there. I would be left with so few artists if you couldn't. I should also say for Jacobin, so I've written two things since the last show. One of them is so one of them is about our good friend JD Vance. Somebody like even better than Roger Waters. So says JD Vance is wrong. Donald Trump was no anti-war president, because JD Vance just had an op-ed in the last couple of weeks in the Wall Street Journal where he endorses Donald Trump for president in 2024, which is not in itself very surprising because, Trump helped get Vance across the finish line in Ohio. And of course, it's, not unexpected that he'd return the favor. Also, Vance is entirely bought and paid for by pro-Trump billionaire Peter Thiel. So, he better endorse him unless Thiel's making a last minute pivot to DeSantis. But what I found interesting is that his stated reason wasn't like, oh, Donald Trump is going to cut taxes for rich people again, which I like, which would have made sense at least. But Donald Trump kept the peace as president. He didn't start any wars, which strikes me as leaving a lot out.
Yeah, but at least I just forgot what I was going to say. Go on.
Well, at least whatever Andy was thinking, at least that,
Yeah. No,
yes, at least I had a thought.
We can all agree on that. It's like the scene in Forrest Gump where he speaks at the anti-war rally, and he's like, "I'm going to tell you about Vietnam," and then the mic is cut for like 90 seconds while he's talking, and all the other veterans around him are like, "Oh man, you just said it." That's it. That's all there is to say. So Andy just did that for the war in Ukraine. But speaking of the war in Ukraine, Donald Trump actually did a lot to make that to escalate tensions there. As hard as this is to remember now, one of the big Republican talking points about how weak Obama was that that Obama wasn't going to send heavier weaponry to Ukraine for their war against Russia-backed separatists because he thought it'd be too escalatory. And then within his first year in office, Donald Trump did that. He also bombed Syria in a way that Obama didn't. Obama did bombing of ISIS in Syria, right? But like directed against the regime in Damascus in a way that Obama didn't. And Vance in the article gives him credit for the peace initiative for North Korea, which is fine. That's nice, I guess, even though it didn't lead to anything. It's not like we signed a peace treaty with North Korea. In fact, the U.S. and North Korea don't even neither of them has a no first use policy in place for the other. So we're not even committed to not like initiating a thermonuclear war with North Korea. But like, I guess it's nice that there were some meetings, some diplomatic meetings, but also like, seems like Vance is leaving out the other half of the story, right? Like, in other words, I'm glad that Trump calmed down and decided to like reverse himself. But all of this happened in the first place because we were closer to the brink of war with North Korea than we've been in decades, right? Maybe in some ways since the Korean War. I mean, like Trump and the premier of North Korea were like tweeting angry shit at each other like all the time, every day. It's like, what is he? He called Kim Jong Un called Trump a dotard, I believe is the word, which is fun.
Yes.
Trump.
The liberal, the resistance hero, Kim Jong Un.
Yeah, exactly. And the dotard tweeted back that it's like he kept calling him like Little Rocket Man, and like taunted him. It's like, oh, what, Little Rocket Man's gonna do something? Little Rocket Man's gonna send some missiles? It's like, I don't know that this is behavior that like is conducive to keeping the peace.
You still deserve credit for averting the wars that you almost started. It still counts, right? It's like if you turn the ball over, and then and the other team's about to shoot and you block the shot, it's still a block, right? But maybe you should also count the turnovers, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. But then like, there's a lot else you could say. I mean, like, Israel, Palestine, like Vance gives him credit for the Abraham Accords, which, finally stopped that horrible conflict that we've all lost so much sleep about between Israel and Qatar. But he doesn't mention Trump doing what no president since 1967 was willing to do, which is to recognize the Israeli annexation of East Jerusalem by moving the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem, and thus implicitly taking it off the table as an issue in any future U.S.-backed peace talks. And my favorite is like he goes the entire article without mentioning that Trump brought us closer to the brink of war with Iran than we've been maybe since the hostage crisis. I mean, he backed out of the Obama brokered Iran nuclear deal. He had he assassinated an Iranian general. Like this is. I mean, again, like I guess you're right, Jake. You get credit for you still get credit for averting the wars that you almost started, I guess. But like that you kind of have to have that rule in place to have the evaluation of Trump that Vance ends up with.
Yeah, and we discussed the uptick, or more than an uptick, in drone bombings, right, under Trump, which is like one of the most unilateral types of violence that America is doing. And I mean, Trump revoked an Obama rule on reporting drone strike deaths, so he worked to make it more opaque, if anything. So I think tell anyone who died by American hands in a drone strike, innocent civilian, that Trump was anti-war, I think it would fall. Wouldn't be very persuasive.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it doubled the rate of drone strikes in Yemen, at least. And yeah, took off all of the restraints that which were always like kind of laughably insufficient anyway, right? But took off what few restraints there were on the use of drones. Okay, so the last article I wanted to mention before we got Nick on is also in Jacobin. There we go. It's called "Even When Times Are Tough, Keep Socialism as Your North Star." So this one goes to the reason why we didn't have an episode last week is because I was in Lubbock, Texas. I was at Texas Tech Law School debating John Miltimore from the Foundation for Economic Education, which is a libertarian think tank. So that Jacobin article, the "Even When Times Are Tough, Keep Socialism as Your North Star," what that is, it's just the transcript of my opening statement from that debate. We're going to play the entire debate on air next Monday. So we're going to have on R.M. Brown and Anna Kasparian for that. But that's going to be, next Monday. We'll play the whole debate on air. But again, if you want to read the whole opening statement right now, you can do that at Jacobin. But before we bring in Nick, I just want to show you. I think this is about a third. This is about the last third of the opening statement for that debate. Think, for example, about our frankly psychotic levels of economic inequality. CEOs making hundreds of times the salary of average workers. And then think about the alternative. So if Amazon, for example, were a worker co-op, you might not have completely flat wage scales. You might have to pay some people a little bit more than others to incentivize them to take particularly demanding jobs with a lot of stress and responsibility, or on the other end to take particularly dangerous or unpleasant jobs. But if you showed up to the meeting where everyone was voting on wage scales and said, hey guys, I was thinking, this whole company was Jeff's idea, so why don't we pay him so much more than the rest of us that he'll be able to buy his own spaceship? You know, good luck. I don't think you're going to win the vote. So that brings me to my final point. I know that some of you are probably thinking, okay, Ben, socialism sounds lovely and all, but it's just not realistic. It goes against human nature. People aren't kind and cooperative the way socialism would need them to be. They're selfish, they're competitive, so it wouldn't work. And I think that concern gets things exactly backwards. Because if human beings were angels, capitalism would be vastly less objectionable than it actually is. We wouldn't need to worry about bosses abusing their power over workers because we just trust them to be kind and benevolent. We wouldn't need to worry about all sorts of avoidable human misery coming out of these levels of economic inequality because people with less could always fundamentally count on the generosity of people with more. But I'm afraid we're not angels, so we'll just have to be socialists instead. All right. We are now joined by Jacobin assistant editor Nick French. How are you doing, Nick?
Hey, I'm good. Thanks for having me, Ben.
Yeah, so I was really excited to talk about this this article that you wrote for Jacobin a little while ago. I think it was like a couple weeks ago or something. Because it combines two of my favorite subjects, right? You know, about which are socialism and analytic philosophy, which are, in my experience, not things that you often see mentioned in the same breath.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's also the intersection of two of my biggest interests. You know, I'm proud that Jacobin, unlike most left-wing publications, I think over the years has given more of a voice to, you know, analytic philosophers and fellow travelers such as yourself. So, yeah, happy to have this out there.
yeah. There has been some of that. I mean, I feel like there's that. You know, yeah. I mean, last year I wrote some articles about Jacobin, and I know Matt McManus will come on to talk about Rawls. But I think like this is interesting to me. And actually, I should say like what's your own background with this stuff? I mean, like.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I did my PhD in philosophy at the University of California, Berkeley. I think it's known as a pretty analytic department as opposed to continental. I specialized in moral and political philosophy. So yeah, spent a lot of time poring over Rawls's theory of justice and responses to it, as well as folks like Jerry Cohen, of course.
Yeah. So yes, I like. It's not a big pipeline, but the philosophy grad school to Jacobin pipeline is is one that I like. But in one of the interesting things I think about what you're doing in this article is that I mean, you're right. Like Jacobin is certainly vastly more likely than just about anywhere else to like actually have like actually print an article about like, hey, here's why, John Rawls, for example, says something that's sort of interesting from a socialist perspective, then but here, you're talking, a little bit more broadly about, analytic philosophy, sort of partially in response to another article that was much more critical of it. But just so I can get people's just to kind of ground anybody who maybe only vaguely knows what we're talking about, like when people say like analytic philosophy, I'm not going to ask you for a definition because it's sort of famously impossible to give one, right? But like maybe at least a sort of brief evocative sense of what we're talking about.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think of it as kind of like a 20th century sociological distinction, like among American philosophy departments, especially. So a lot of American philosophy departments were classified as analytic because they tended to be strongly influenced by and responding to figures that came out of a certain tradition, some of which talked about in this article that I was responding to by Christoph Scheringa. So they'd be in a circle, people like Rudolf Carnap, as well as English philosophers like Bertrand Russell, G.E. Moore, Ludwig Wittgenstein, who moved from Vienna to England. And yeah, a lot of it was very much focused on sort of trying to translate traditional philosophical problems into logically rigorous language.
Mm-hmm.
Over time, that sort of narrow conception of philosophy in analytic departments became less popular, but there was still a kind of, I guess, vibe, like science-y, mathy vibe that we're going to try to be as sort of rigorous and precise as possible in clarifying concepts and in formulating and trying to answer traditional philosophical problems. And this is opposed to philosophers who identified with the so-called continental tradition, who tended to be less into this sort of project of scientizing or logicizing philosophy. A lot of them were responding more to the Hegelian tradition or to people like Nietzsche or Heidegger. Later on, the post-structuralists were very influential. So people like Derrida and Foucault. So they kind of became sort of like camps within American philosophy, is my way of thinking about it. I do think that has broken down a lot now, but there are, there's still sort of the vibe-based distinction, like analytic philosophers and continental philosophers. Yeah, I don't know. What would you say? Yeah, it's kind of hard to wrap your mind around it. Nope.
It looks like we lost Ben, huh?
Oh, did we lose?
He was.
Did we lose Ben?
Yeah, he was in a frozen smile. Yeah, I thought he just. Ben
I
really,
wasn't sure if it was me or not.
No. Yeah, so I definitely am not qualified to substitute for Ben. Yeah, I mean, let's see. I'll give Ben 1 second. His electric went out like 2 or 3 weeks ago, and he was at a cafe. So hopefully, it's not that his electricity went out. All right, Ben is back.
Okay.
Oh yeah, well, big continental philosophy got me. I was kicked off the Wi-Fi. I'm actually still not sure what happened there.
Ben,
Yes,
you missed. I made an incredibly insightful point about analytic philosophy and Marxism that Nick was. He never heard anything that intelligent before. So, but I'll give it back to you.
Okay, cool, awesome. So, yeah. So last thing I heard before the Wi-Fi issue was about how there is still this sort of very clear vibes-based distinction, right? Like, in other words, even though you're sort of in this weird place where you have people we think of as analytic philosophers who, write books agreeing with Hegel, or who like do philosophy of mind, and they're like really into like drawing insights from Heidegger for that or whatever. We still sort of,
Right.
in terms of style of presentation, kind of argumentative style, maybe some influences, right? We still, there's still the sense that you sort of know what people mean, right? When they use these terms, analytic, and yeah. But also in terms of where you were, like what you're doing in this article, kind of going back a little ways, right, to sort of, people who are, analytic philosophers who are writing at a time when there is maybe, a clearer distinction to be made, like Rawls, for example, right? Like you, or Jacobin has come up a couple times. You kind of make the case that there's something that's like really valuable in the style of argumentation and in some of the sort of intellectual tools that are associated with it, that Marxists can kind of benefit from engaging with. So like in my, the thing that I wrote, in Substack about this sort of little mini debate about the value of analytic philosophy. I mean, I was sort of very focused for a lot of it on the, hey, look at all these important figures in analytic philosophy who were socialists aspect. But like what I liked about your article is that you were sort of pressing like a slightly different point than that, which is not so much like, okay, let's kind of forget for a second the sociology of analytic philosophy, like what the politics of any particular philosophers are, or how this played out historically, right? All this stuff, the original Scheringa, a lot of it was about that. A lot of what I wrote was about that, right? But like let's just think about what's sort of value in this kind of set of analytical tools. And one thing, point that I thought you made really well in there is that it's sort of there's this sort of weird tendency that some Marxists have to think that the kind of most Marxist thing to do is to just sort of not really make any arguments or sort of appeal to any appeal to any tools of analysis that Marx himself wasn't working with. That you're just kind of repeating what the big guy said, and you're making arguments in the ways that are sort of most similar to how he himself might do it, since Marx obviously came originally out of the Young Hegelians and was very influenced by reading Hegel, so you sort of put things in Hegelese, which I've got to say always reminds me in a weird way of like somebody who's like maybe not a very good guitar player, who's like, oh, but this is like the exact same kind of distortion pedal that Jimi Hendrix used. It's like, yeah, okay, but like, what are you going to do with that, right? And you make this point really nicely at the beginning of the article that Marx himself was sort of very open to kind of using what could whatever was available to him to make his arguments, right? Like in Capital, like a lot of capital, like a surprising amount of capital, is just Marx kind of making use of the reports of these factory inspectors who are not like, these aren't like revolutionary socialist commissars. These are, like Victorian era British, state bureaucrats,
Yeah. So I mean, I think that's. Oh, did you freeze again?
Oh no!
Oh, you're
Did I
here.
freeze?
Okay, you just. No, you're
All
good.
right,
You
so-
just stopped in a
all
very.
right.
You were very still for a moment.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I think it is really interesting. I mean, Marx was both, trying to take advantage of like what he thought was the best, the most important intellectual resources of his time, which included Hegelian philosophy as well as British economics. And yeah, of course, a lot of those people, the vast majority of those people, were not socialists or critics of capitalism, but he was trying to use those tools to mount a critique of capitalism. And yeah, it's an interesting question why so many of his followers, when it comes to sort of conceptual resources, intellectual resources made available after the time of his writing, why so many of them kind of are averse to having a similar sort of spirit that Marx had. I mean, I do think part of it is because they're drawing on certain things that Marx said and certain things that his followers said. I mean, I do think that, Marx had these sort of, very famous sort of injunctions against moral philosophy or sort of constructing visions of what an ideal socialist society would look like. So I think that people have really, jumped on that to resist doing any kind of moral theorizing, and they've used that to think that that's somehow anti-Marxist or anti-materialist, and I think that's a part of Marx that we need to critique. Actually, similarly with the Hegelian stuff, I think a lot of people who followed Marx thought, oh, there's something very key about there's some sort of special Hegelian method that Marx is using that is, fundamentally opposed to the methods of, non-Hegelian social science or non-Hegelian philosophy. And so I think that strand of thinking has led to a big suspicion of, anything that smacks of, traditional economics or like neoclassical economics at all. Anything that seems like, things like game theory that involve analyzing, individuals in terms of like, rational choices and the way that trying to use that sort of understanding of what's rational for individuals in certain situations, using that as a framework for understanding society. People have thought, well, that's not Hegelian because, the Hegelian view is that society is some kind of totality, and that's incompatible with, a game theoretic approach or attention to individual motivations and interests.
Yeah, I mean, like, in fact, that article you responded to mentioned a couple times, like, I think it actually has a line about game theory, decision theory, and something else, being tools of Cold War research, which is like, okay, fair enough. I mean, so is a computer. I can still use it to, spread, spread socialist ideas and analysis. But yeah, that last point you made is really interesting to me about. Because, like, when you think about where this tension, or alleged tension between sort of, some kind of specifically Hegelian methodology and all the rest of the stuff is supposed to come from, I mean, sometimes it can be very funny, like watching people try to pin it down. Like, I wish I remembered the name of his interlocutor in this discussion, but I remember Steve Paxton, who wrote a very good book called Unlearning Marx, he was on Doug Lane's old YouTube channel, and whoever it was that he was arguing with on there, was sort of making this case, like, no, you need this like Hegelian methodology or whatever. So like G.A. Cohen, for example, because the immediate context was they're talking about Cohen's book, Karl Marx's Theory of History, a defense, and in that, And this guy said, no, this isn't like real Marxism because you don't have this Hegelian, methodology. And Steve's kind of pushing like, okay, well, tell me about the Hegelian methodology, right? I mean, what is it that's, what is it that's all about? And he kind of comes up with like, well, it's all about seeing things as being interconnected and changing. And it's like, well, I don't know. There's a lot of that in that book, right? It's a lot about the connections between things. There's a lot about stuff changing, right? And it sort of feels almost trollish because you feel like interpreting it that literally you're almost missing something. But also seriously, like what's, that seems like it, right? And but I think the sort of most maybe kind of the more interesting version is what you said at the end there about roughly what you're talking about is what's sometimes called methodological individualism, the idea that that you should try to understand what's going on in society as a whole, that like if you're going to have a kind of complete theory of that, you're not done yet until you've sort of understood how this plays out in terms of individual behavior. So like the obvious example from a Marxist perspective would be oftentimes you'll hear Marxists say things like, well, such and such happens, like some social phenomenon, right? This happens because it's in the interest of the capitalist class, or even like say it's in the interest of capitalism, to do it. And
the functional explanation.
Yeah. And so, okay, well, but like, what's the, just saying this helps the capitalist class or this helps capitalism isn't actually an explanation of why it happens, because presumably for the thing to happen, you need a lot of particular individual people to do stuff, and you need to explain like what motivates them to do the things.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what's sort of ironic about the people who I think push back on the use of things like game theory or methodological individualism. I mean, just a brief aside, I think methodological individualism is a term I avoided because I think that's sort of a messy debate, and like on some understandings of it, maybe it's wrong, but I do think there's a core insight there, and this is what Eric Wright thought, which is that basically what you just said, which is you need to cash out, any sort of explanations of social dynamics in terms of at least a lot of it needs to be cashed out in terms of individual preferences, motivations, behavior. So I think a good way of understanding what a lot of analytical Marxists are trying to do, and I think this is how they themselves understood it, is take some of the sort of functional explanations, X happens because it's in the interest of capitalists or capitalism, and just sort of cash that out in terms of, well, what are the sort of pressures on individual behavior, and what are the individual behaviors that are actually underlying these dynamics that Marx and Marxists talked about. And like, yeah, if we want to think of society as, this holistic unity and it's interconnected, well, what exactly are the connections? What are the parts of that unity doing to reproduce it?
Yeah, exactly. And so somebody in particular you mentioned in that connection in the article is a sociologist, but like somebody who's in this sort of intellectual current of analytical Marxism, is Eric Olin, right?
Yeah, and I mean, Wright, I think is a lot of his work is focused on basically understanding class in a rigorous way. I mean, Marx talks a lot about class. I think one of Marx's greatest contributions to Western thought is like thinking seriously about class and what it means, and what sort of social dynamics we can expect because of what classes are by nature and the way they interact. So I think Eric Olin Wright's work is really important because he was trying to really figure out different dimensions of class. In the article, I focus basically on his work on class location, and Wright tries to define in a rigorous way, like, what does it mean to be a member of a class? And he cashes that out in terms of, following Marx, what is the individual's relationship to the means of production, and how does that affect what they have to do in order to survive? How does that affect their interests? How does that pit their interests against the interests of people in other classes? And yeah, he takes a very, what I would say, an individualistic approach to understanding class in some ways, right? Classes aren't just these sort of amorphous collectivities. No, they're it's a group category that's based on what different individuals have in common in terms of their material interests and what they have to do to reproduce themselves. So I think that's like pretty fundamental. I think that's a good example of how these sort of tools of like traditional or not traditional, but like non-Marxist social science or individualistic social science can be useful in making sense of capitalism. Oh, Ben, I think you're muted.
So I am. So yeah, if you have those social scientific tools that are all about analysis of individual circumstances and individual interests and how that manifests in individual behavior, I mean, I can kind of understand how at first glance somebody can hear that and say, oh, so you're talking about individuals, so you're going to be missing the boat, because what I'm interested in talking about is classes. But I mean, essentially, using rights work and also using sort of more, a much more recent example. I think this book came out last year. You mentioned the Class Matrix by Vivek Jibber. That these are Wright and Chipper are authors who are trying to. It's not that they're talking about individuals instead of talking about class. They're talking about individuals for the point of analyzing what exactly classes are, how classes work, and in order precisely to sort of have a kind of sharpen the traditional Marxist analysis of class, right? So you mentioned just now class location and Chipper, and Oracle Wright's talking about contradictory class locations, the sense in which like some people are in positions where in one sense they have one class location, but in a different sense they have a different one, right? So an obvious example would be somebody who has like if you're like a if you're like a teacher but you're married to like a rich business owner, or like your parents are that or whatever, right? That'd be a case which like, okay, there's a certain sense in which your class location is the working class, but there's also a sense in which it's not, because that line you quoted earlier from Wright, what you have determines what you have to do in order to survive. You don't actually have to to have that job, right? So that's like a small example of how that kind of analysis works. But I mean, like, there is something, I mean, maybe just moving, starting to move just a little bit from the descriptive to the normative. I mean, like, there is something that's funny both about you're talking about individuals, so this is like anti-Marxist liberalism sort of thing that you get from some people on the left, and then there's this equal and opposite thing that you get from some people who are self-conscious enemies of socialism, where they'll say like, oh, you're talking about collectives, and so you're not taking people seriously as individuals, and both of those sort of strike me as confused in about the same way, right? Because like, I always thought, yeah.
Oh yeah. So I didn't mean to. I think that's exactly right. I mean, I think that one of the I don't know, key insights of Marxism, or at least this rendering of Marxism, is that yes, individuals exist and are real and have their own particular interests, but they are constrained by social structures, and those social structures determine how interests can be shared and how interests can be opposed, right? I mean, this is this is sort of one aspect of maybe of what Marx meant when he said individuals make history, but, not just as they please. So you could have this totally, atomized view of human beings and human agency that just says like, we're all free, totally independent agents. And like, we shouldn't like try to determine the, look at the social determinants of behavior interests at all, which is like the sort of right-wing libertarian position. And then, there's this sort of muddle-headed, Hegelian, or Hegelian interpretation of Marx that's like, oh, classes cannot be explained in terms of individuals or individual behavior at all. And that's, I think you're exactly right.
Yeah, I mean, like when people say, actually, the guy who I was debating in Texas, from the Libertarian think tank. I think I actually did say at some point, and then I just never got a chance to go back to it, which is one of my few regrets about how that conversation went. Like something that was kind of along those lines, like treating people as collectives and not as individuals, whatever. It's like I never, like, just even at a really simple-minded level, I never understood what the difference is supposed to be between like a libertarian talking about like taxpayers as a category, being like, unjustly victimized, right?
Right.
A socialist talking about workers. I mean, those are two like different analyses, but like they're not different in the sense that like one of them's about individuals and one of them's about categories. You're talking about, people, again, moving from the sort of descriptive question that we're talking about how you analyze how capitalism works to even the sort of normative questions about how to think about what's wrong with that, which is also something you spend a lot of time in the article about. Like, okay, there's nothing about saying that, the working class, right, the set of individuals who are in this particular class location, are by virtue of that, right? They have this kind of common complaint, and there's something that's like, and there's something that's wrong that's being done by having social institutions be this way to everybody in that category, and everybody in that category has a vested interest, to the extent that they do. It's complicated. That's what a lot of that right chipper kind of analysis is about, right? But has this vested interest in changing those institutions. I mean, there's nothing like, in the sense that, because like, look, I mean, in the sense that I can understand what somebody's talking about when they get upset about, like, oh, you should be talking about individuals. Like maybe if, like, just a philosophy nerd kind of example is like, maybe like utilitarianism or some forms of utilitarianism is like a view that actually doesn't treat people as individuals, because we're just sort of talking about like, we're just interested in like adding together all the units of happiness and subtracting units of suffering, and without like really being attentive to the fact that, people are suffering as individuals and being wronged as individuals, whatever. And to the extent that I can kind of understand what somebody's getting upset about when they get upset about that, it's like, okay, but there's nothing about just doing class analysis or like having, or even saying there's something normatively objectionable about a certain set of class structures that takes us across that line, right? I mean, that isn't, sort of morally treating people as, individual human beings who matter individually.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's really well said. I mean, my best, it's hard to like work your way into the right wing mind space, but I mean, I think one thing that might be going on is like this idea that, well, capitalism, capitalist, the wage labor employment relationship, like that's all a matter of individuals making free choices. So to sort of treat this as a matter of, structural injustice or oppression is to not, respect individuals' free choices. And, that would also explain, maybe helps explain why they see a problem with, the taxpayers being victimized by the state versus, us saying that workers are exploited, dominated by capitalists. They, they're under the illusion that, the capitalist marketplace is this realm of freedom, whereas, it's only when the state steps in that you have something bad and objectionable. I guess that would maybe that's my best.
Oh, no, I think that is definitely a thing that many of these guys think. Although, a point that I'd always push is that it's not like it's not like you can have capitalism without an enforcement mechanism, right? I mean, like if you're saying like individual A owns, to put in Marx's term from Capital, individual A owns some money and individual B only owns labor power. Like, well, individual, a different way of saying that is that like the distribution of goods that the state is enforcing is one where, individual A has that money and individual B doesn't, right? That's, but yeah, I think that's, and I think that's exactly right, that there is that people think, well, since these are meaningfully free transactions, if you're not treating it that way, you're not respecting people's free choices or whatever. But like, I guess I would say all the work is being done there by the first part of that sentence, right? Since these are meaningfully free transactions, right? Because of course, like, a lot of the argument in Capital, for example, or a lot of, or like one of the things that like G.A. Cohen argues, he has this classic paper, the Structure of Proletariat on Freedom, is well, but it's not, right? Like this is not actually meaningfully free because you have this, massive power imbalance that, that leaves people who only own their labor power with, very few realistic or at least acceptable choices other than making this arrangement.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think this is a good illustration of, just to move on to sort of the next, I think, thing we wanted to talk about was like, this is a good illustration of why it's actually important to like do normative theory of the kind that people like Jerry Cohen were doing, right? Because like we want to be able to sort of explain in clear terms like what is wrong with the sort of right-wing argument or right-wing assumptions that says capitalism is fine, it's just a matter of adults making free and informed consensual choices. I think that it's good that people are able to give arguments of the kind that you were just giving that explains what exactly is wrong with that, why actually, by any sort of reasonable normative principles, what's going on, with workers under capitalism is not freedom. They're not making free and informed choices. And we should try to figure out something better.
Yeah, no, exactly. That, you have, I mean, like in that Cohen paper, Structure of Proletariat on Freedom, he has this like really nice point about how, whenever we typically say that somebody is forced to do something, like what we typically mean, right, by saying that, you weren't free not to do it, you were forced to do it, is like, you didn't have any acceptable choices, right? If somebody puts a gun to your head and says, fill up this sack, for the bank vault, it's not that literally the only thing you could do is fill it up, right? You could just, say a final prayer and say, nope, shoot me. You could make a desperate attempt to wrestle the gun away, like what we mean is you have no acceptable choices besides that one. So this takes us to another thing that I found really interesting about your article, which was the defense of John Rawls. So in the so there are, like, I think a couple of different ways in which socialists or Marxists of some varieties, have a problem with Rawls. At the sort of most basic level, you kind of alluded to this earlier, there is like a strand of classical Marxism that says, let's just not bother, with too much talk about, morality or justice or whatever, and certainly let's not bother with it to the point of like sitting around theorizing about it. And like the only, so it's like like Cohen has this line. It's in his book. If you're an egalitarian, how come you're so rich? Which is, my dumb joke about that book is always that I want to get to the point in life where that question is a good way to own me. But in that book, it's his Gifford lectures. There's a point where he's reminiscing about visiting communist Czechoslovakia, and his like uncle is a editor of a party journal there, and he's arguing with his uncle in Prague, and his uncle's like, why do you keep talking about all this morality stuff? That's just some like bourgeois nonsense. I don't know about that. He's like, but uncle, whatever his name was, like, you've dedicated your entire life to this movement. Surely that's like a moral commitment.
Right.
And he says, no, I just, it's just that it's just that it's like in the interest of the working class to do this. And he's like, but you're not part of the working class, right?
Right, exactly.
What are you talking about? Like that can't be it, and so that's like one objection, that it's just like, well, let's like only talk about the descriptive issues, how capitalism works, how we think that's going to be overcome in the future, and let's not talk at all about the normative issues. Let's not talk about why it is that we find capitalism so objectionable. And then like maybe on a more interested level, there's some people object to what's sometimes called ideal theory, the idea that you should be in the business of like trying to figure out what would count as a society that's not objectionable at all, right, from the perspective of thinking about justice, and that's like utopian or unhelpful or artificial or something like that, and then like kind of on the last, like sort of moving to more and more concrete objections. Like maybe the last one would be just something like, a lot of even some socialists who are okay with both A and B, right? Both sort of moral theorizing and even doing it in that ideal theory way, just say, just think that like, they're sort of vaguely under the impression that Rawls is a liberal, and they want something that's like they want a theory that's like to the left of that, or maybe is like more demandingly egalitarian or something like that. So I know I just threw a lot at you, but any threads of that you wanted to pick up and run with?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think maybe I'll leave the Cohen story as like a sufficient refutation of the first kind of line of thought. But yeah, in terms of objection to ideal theory, I'm convinced by the idea. I think maybe Tommy Shelby said this in an interview that we ran in Jacobin with him recently, that like any like critique of injustice or sort of like, critique of society as oppressive in some respect, like implies sort of a conception of like a non-oppressive or a just, social set of social arrangements. So I think that, if you think that we ought to be engaged in the project of social criticism at all, you have to allow, ideal theory to some extent, to just thinking about like, well, what are non-oppressive or just social arrangements, at some level, what do those look like? So I don't think that's really a fair critique of Rawls.
If you're going to say, like, if you're going to be critical of, you think there's something like unfair or bad or unjust about, some set of social arrangements, it is kind of a legitimate question to say, like, okay, what would it take for you not to think that? Right, like what would it take for you to be satisfied? I mean, like I actually think on an intuitive level that's like a fairly obvious response, but okay, so this maybe brings us to the last one, which is the sort of impression that some people have that's like, okay, but even if we're okay with doing ideal theory, maybe Rawls is doing like liberal ideal theory, whereas we want like better, more radical ideal theory.
Yeah, sorry, I lost you for a second.
Okay. Yeah, internet's all over the place tonight. So just more succinctly, maybe, right? So like the third objection, so like that would just kind of leave us with the sort of third line of objection to Rawls, which is okay, even if we're okay with doing morality talk, even if we're okay with ideal theory, then then you might still say, okay, but like Rawls sounds like he's doing some kind of like wishy-washy like lib ideal theory, right? I don't want liberal ideal theory. I want like radical ideal theory.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, like I think that there are actually like left critiques to be made of Rawls. I don't go with him all the way on everything, but yeah, I mean, I think that we should start by recognizing how sort of left or radical he actually is. I mean, what he's trying to do basically is say that, like, look, we all live in a society. We have to figure out like what are the principles that we think should govern that society. What does a just society look like? And he's trying to figure out, this society should be justifiable to every person. He's taking for granted a certain kind of like, post-enlightenment, liberal, egalitarian viewpoint. And he's trying to say, well, what does that involve? Kind of giving equal respect, equal dignity to everyone. What would it mean to have a fair society? And that's why he comes up with this veil of ignorance idea, which is, okay, imagine you knew nothing about your location in a society that was going to come into being. You didn't know, your class. You didn't know what your talents were. You didn't know anything about your kind of idiosyncratic vision of the good. Obviously things like sex, gender, race, you don't know about. So like in figuring out the principles to govern society, given that you don't have any of that information about yourself, what would you choose? Assuming that you're, in this thought experiment, you're just looking out for yourself, maybe your family and your descendants, but you don't have any kind of like special concern for other people in society. And he thinks you're going to choose principles that basically provide everyone with equal basic political rights, in terms of free expression, right to vote, etc. And you're also going to want to, like, social and institutional arrangements benefit everybody, like, are to everybody's advantage, even the people who end up least privileged.
Mm-hmm.
So there are lots of critiques you can make about that argument. I think the veil of ignorance thought experiment is maybe just like not helpful for a lot of people. But the basic idea is society's basic institutions should be justifiable to everyone, regardless of accidents of birth. And like the implications of that he ends up drawing are actually pretty radical. I mean, he's clear that like welfare state capitalism is not good enough. I mean, this is why it's like crazy to me that, people like Sharinga say this thing that he's some kind of apologist for American liberalism or like 20th century American capitalism. I mean, it's just like,
no,
he's pretty clear that that's not what he's.
Yeah, I mean, he explicitly says that not only is capitalism as it's instantiated in 20th century America not good enough, but that no possible form of capitalism would be, because even for exactly at least one of the central reasons the socialists would say that that like the thing that he's identified about capitalism that makes it not good enough, even in its nicest, most welfare statey forms, is precisely that it's divided. That under capitalism, society is divided into this class of capitalists who own the means of production and a class of laborers who don't and have to go work for the first people, right? I mean, that's his objection. And he says, okay, what would a society be that wouldn't be vulnerable to this objection? And he he's trying to be very careful about this. And he sort of says, because a very consistent methodological thing about Rawls is like, look, wherever there's a sort of empirical question about what would where like you're not, in order to come to a certain conclusion, you wouldn't just need the value premise. You wouldn't just need the premise about justice. You'd also need some sort of question about what the empirical facts are like in practice. Then, he sort of always takes a pass on that and says, look, I'm just trying to figure out the premise about justice. you guys figure it out and ask the sociologists and economists and everybody about the other premise. So because he's doing that here, he says, well, you could either, here are kinds of societies that, unlike even the most advanced social democratic kind of capitalism, would fulfill the requirements of justice. One would be some sort of liberal socialism. He doesn't go into any great detail, but he sort of says, collective ownership of the means of production, basically, but also you're respecting everybody's democratic rights. It's not like Stalinism. And then the other is, it says property owning democracy, which is super duper vague about what that means. But but it seems to be something like if you have somehow or another ownership relations are dispersed enough that there isn't like a sort of meaningful separation between here's like a class of workers, the class of capitalists. Everybody just kind of owns stuff. And, it seems to me that whatever you think about that, like, I actually think that that's, there's something about that way of setting things up that's actually totally consistent with the sort of Marxist view, which is you could say, look, that quote from the 18th premier of Louis Bonaparte that you mentioned earlier, right? They make their own history, but not under circumstances of their own choosing, that like, it's like, yeah, we don't, look, in principle, if we could just have a society of smallholders where, everybody, like nobody had to go to work for anybody else, or at least not for very long, because everybody just owns their own little thing, whatever. It's like, yeah, I guess, at least as far as the sort of like, it's bad to have a society that's divided into a ruling class, labor class objection. I guess that would solve it, but like historically, that's just not on the table at this point in the development of like a complex modern economy.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that bit is a little puzzling to me. Why he didn't, sort of grapple with that idea more. But yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I mean, a lot of people. I feel like one of the other sort of dominant trends in moral philosophy now that a lot of people who are socialists or sympathetic to socialism are advancing now is this kind of like republicanism or neo-republicanism, basically trying to come up with a theory of justice that's based around the idea of non-domination. And I think you see a similar dynamic there where basically like people are drawing on this tradition that, I think a lot of Republican philosophers now and historically have been advocates of like a society of smallholders, like a sort of smallholder property owning society. But yeah, I think the argument is the same there that, given historical development, that is no longer a possibility. And so pushes towards us thinking, it basically thinking in terms of what a socialist society without domination should look like. But yeah, I basically think Rawls gets you to a very similar place, and he makes good moral arguments that I think people should grapple with seriously.
Yeah, I mean, I also, look, I think, I agree with you what you said earlier that there are legitimate, left critiques of Rawls, although honestly, some of the ones that are the most popular, I don't know that I would include in that category, right? Like a lot of people sort of do this like thing that's like, oh, well, he's assuming this sort of universal subject, or, you don't know what it's like to, you can't know that you would endorse something if you didn't know whether you were, because like our subjectivity is too thoroughly bound up with these facts about ourselves or whatever. And I actually don't really buy any of that. I think those are like pretty bad objections. I think, like even to the extent that you grant that it's psychologically impossible to like remove yourself from these facts about your identity or whatever, it's like, okay, one, you clearly can at least a little bit, right? And two, to the extent you can, it's like that might be an epistemic barrier to your figuring out what would count, what would be a just society. But it's not clear to me that that's a great objection to say that that's what a just society is. Like I think a sort of better, objection is is maybe a version of like the Jacobin one about how there's a that's like all else being equal, less inequality is always better, and that or less inequality of a certain kind, is always better. And granted, it's not always equal, because sometimes you have these trade-offs where you might need a little bit of inequality for the sake of incentives or whatever, but you should sort of keep your eye on the idea that that ultimately it's progress to the extent that we don't need to do that anymore, or we need to do that less, or something like that. Those sorts of criticisms I can buy into a lot more. But also I don't know. I think the basic Rawlsian framework, I do think, even if you think it's not the whole story, I do think that it seems pretty compelling to me as a way of capturing at least one really important part of what we care about when we're thinking about justice.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think, yeah, I'm on the same page. I mean, yeah, I don't want to get into the Cohen Rawls debate, but
fair enough.
I'm on the same page. I think the central idea of Rawls again is just everyone counts equally, but also we're all individuals. We want to avoid this sort of utilitarian sacrificing some for the benefit of others that you mentioned before. But all individuals ought to be treated equally and have equal chances, and society should be structured in a way that ensures that. I think that's a great sort of normative starting point for thinking about what a socialist society would look like.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. So that's yeah, I really enjoyed the article. This is something I'm always really happy to see stuff like this in Jacobin. Once again, this we've got a link to it, I believe, in the description. But it's called "How Analytic Philosophers Have Made Sense of Capitalism." Everybody should check it out. Thank you again, Nick.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Hope it's not the last time. See you. All right. So I am. Before we go to the post game for GTAA patrons, just want to say a couple of things at the end of the main show here. One of them, again, for anybody who missed it earlier, is next week's episode. We are going to be watching the full video of that debate that I did with libertarian think tanker John Miltimore at Texas Tech Law School last week. And we're also going to have R.M. Brown and Anna Kasparian on. So that one should be a lot of fun. In between now and then, in fact, real quick, in between now and then, tomorrow, for those of you who are in Los Angeles, California, or immediately thereafter, I was talking to my neighbor down here, Jason Miles of This Is Revolution, the other day, and we were talking about how one of our favorite things about the live shows is sort of the meet and greet, with patrons and even viewers, right? Fans of the shows. But yeah, we don't actually need to be having a live show going on to do one of those, right? We could just do one. And so we were talking about it, and we ended up deciding that it'd be fun tomorrow, so Tuesday, February 14th. If you don't have plans, if you don't have if you don't have a date, for Valentine's Day, and plans along those lines, and instead you want to just sit around shooting the shit with some divorced communist podcasters. If that's what sounds like a fun plan for you for Tuesday. So Jason Miles and I from This Revolution are going to be there's this famous bar in Jordan Dubin, who's our live show producer, is also coming. She informs me in chat. And So there's this famous bar in LA called the Rainbow Room. I believe when we made the reservation, we've actually got Slash's booth at the Rainbow Room just for a little sort of extra fun element to this. So tomorrow at 7 p.m. At Slash's booth at the Rainbow Room in Los Angeles, we're just doing a little meet and greet. Could talk about could talk about rock music, talk about socialism, almost certainly. Talk about the podcasts. Jason and I might have an argument about, which is the best Nightmare on Elm Street movie, or what the best 4, hair metal bands are. So if you want to come by and hang, that is open to everybody, right? I mean, this is just something we're kind of doing at the spur of the moment. So if it's just if it's just me and Jason and Jordan and our friend Bertrand Cooper, who's also coming, I believe. There was talk of Cedric Johnson making an appearance. I don't know if that's going to happen. But if it's just like the 4 or 5 of us, that still sounds like a good time to me. But if you want to come meet and greet, come do that.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, unfortunately, I'm out on the East Coast, but I do have a girlfriend. But I think Ben, you could probably attest to the fact that any girlfriend, what they're the most romantic thing they're going to want to do on Valentine's Day is go to your favorite podcast meet and greet, or your boyfriend or your partner or anyone. So even if you have a date, I'd say bring him to the meet and greet, and maybe you could answer questions about their relationship,
Look, if she says that she doesn't want to spend Valentine's Day, doing a meet and greet, with socialist podcasters, then you've got to really re-examine whether this is the relationship you want to be in. I mean, I'm just trying to keep it real here.
Yeah.
Hard truths. So yeah, that's going on at 7 tomorrow night. The Rainbow Room in Los Angeles, and it's a callback to something I've said a few times in the past about the median GTA viewer, and is a 30-year-old grad student whose girlfriend is sick of hearing him talk about how much he hates Sam Harris. But she'll still like, she'll actually turns out she'll actually like it this time. So come do that. And 7 p.m. tomorrow night, Rainbow Room, Los Angeles, meet and greet, should be a lot of fun. Otherwise, we are, other than the usual sort of in between live streams and clips, I will see you again if you are not a GTA patron next Monday with Arun and Anna to watch the debate. And if you are a patron, then I will see you in about 90 seconds with philosophy professor Ryan Lake. We're going to be watching some more Tim Pool. I don't know if that's an enticement or not, but we're going to be. Turns out that Tim Pool really hates Plato, Kant, and Bertrand Russell. Believe it or not, all 3 of those come up in a big way. So we're going to be going over some of that. We're going to be going over some of the stuff with James O'Keefe, who always seemed like a very nice guy to me, but turns out to have a dark side. And we're going to be going over some recent video evidence that Sam Cedar would be getting more lines on Bob's Burgers if he read Nagel and Scanlon. So should be a very fun post game for patrons. If you're not yet a patron, $5 a month, patreon.com/Ben Burgess. And you get these patron exclusive post games every Monday night after the regular episode. You get access to the Discord server. You get all kinds of good stuff. Mostly, you get our eternal love and gratitude for helping to keep this going. So if you're not a patron right now, there's no time like the present. If you are, I will see you in about 60 seconds. Left is best.